Robert.
And
Robert.
Oh, I got it. Thanks. I couldn't see myself on the screen. But yeah, thank you. You know, as Hannah mentioned, these are events where we like to introduce a topic, provide a little bit of background, and then really focus on having some conversations and listening to some questions and ideas that matter to you. And so I am part of the With Science unit on UW-Madison's campus. And I focus a lot on outreach. And then I've also been involved in the Upper Sugar River Watershed doing research before I became a board member. And now I'm the board president. And I have studied dragonflies, their ecology and behavior for about 30 years. About the last 10 years, that's really focused on the adults. And for about the last 10 or 15 years, most of my research has involved citizen scientists. And I would say it's the most meaningful part of my career in research. So if we could have the next slide, please. And dragonflies are just remarkable creatures. They're beautiful, they're showy, they're found worldwide. The only continent they haven't been observed on is Antarctica. And they have lore and mythology. They've inspired a lot of poetry, especially Asian poetry. And so here are a couple of my favorite haikus from a couple of different poets about dragonflies on the left. And then I've also written a number of poems about dragonflies. And this one in particular, I was watching this one dragonfly, and it was flying and fending off other males from its territory. And then when it would perch, I noticed that the tips of its wings were just tattered. And so it reminded me of resilience. So it inspired a poem. And if we could have the next slide. And they have an interesting life cycle. We'll start with the eggs. So at about 2 o'clock on the screen. And so there you can see some eggs coming out of the female. They lay eggs. I'll probably call that oviposition at some point. Sometimes they lay them individually. Sometimes they lay them in a little strand, almost like some amphibian species. And then sometimes the darners that we'll talk about, they actually cut a little slit in aquatic vegetation and put the eggs inside vegetation. And then at 6 o'clock, you can see the juvenile stage or the naiad. So it goes through incomplete metamorphosis. So unlike, say, moths and butterflies, it doesn't have a pupal stage. Wings begin to develop pretty early. And dragonflies in Wisconsin usually take about 2 to up to 7 years to go from egg to adult. Most of them around 2 or 3. And then they emerge. They come out of their last exoskeleton. I'll say a little bit more about a new project we're going to do using the exuvium, which you can see at about 9 o'clock. And that's the shed exoskeleton. And then they become a flying adult. They fly anywhere from several weeks to several months. They're voracious predators, feeding on a variety of flying insects, especially flies and mosquitoes. And then they mate and lay eggs again. So that's the life cycle. And if we could go to the next slide. And, you know, and I mentioned for the last 10 or 15 years, I've been doing research using citizen scientists. And it started with undergrads from some of my classes at UW-Madison. And one of the nice things about doing research on adult dragonflies is you really only need your own curiosity and observation skills. We do something called the 10-minute point count. So we stand in a location and just take note of the species that we see from our vantage point. And if you're interested in doing some of the dragonfly monitoring trainings, and Jesse and Kristen have participated in that, we'll have a lot more information about the trainings. If we could do the next slide. And you can see there's a range. Some of the citizen scientists are quite young. One of the things that Wade and Hannah and I talked about when we sort of began to think about how we might implement this within the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association is we wanted it to be multi-generational. And so here is a neighbor, as child. I take a Monday afternoon neighborhood nature walk with several kids since last fall. And a couple of weeks ago, we put in emergent traps. And so this is a pilot to then learn more about patterns in when different species of dragonflies emerge. And so you can see Cam in a very large size of chest waders that are almost swallowing her. And then the emergent trap, it's just window screening mounted between poles, and the bottom mesh is in contact with the substrate. When dragonflies emerge to turn into adults, they crawl out onto vegetation, grass, twigs, cattails, sedges, rushes. And so this provides a surface for them to crawl out on. And on the far right, you can see the exoskeleton. We can identify that exoskeleton to species. And so this will be a new project that some of the volunteers this summer may pilot. It's also circles back to one of the first projects I did in my career as an undergraduate researcher. So it's kind of come full circle. The next slide, please. And here is aren't these just beautiful? I mean, look at those. I mean, the bright green, the huge eyes, the bright blue abdomen. And so the male is the one in the blue abdomen, and you can see it's grasping the female right behind the head at the thorax. And the female is actually slicing a little slit in some aquatic vegetation and depositing eggs there. And very often, males will remain in tandem connected to the females while they're flying, even until the females oviposit. Not all individuals do that, and not all species do that. There is some evidence that males tend to stay attached to the females if the density, the number of potential rival males is high. And we think it helps ensure paternity, because dragonflies, male dragonflies, have this somewhat unique and animal kingdom feature where they can scoop out the sperm deposited by another male and get rid of it and deposit their own. So this is an example of oviposition where they're in tandem. And I think Jesse in particular has had some just amazing photos of dragonflies in tandem that she might talk about. The next slide, please. Here is another, on the left, you can see black saddlebags, and here they are flying in tandem. And they're called saddlebags because on the hind wings, they have these large dark black patches, and they look kind of like saddlebags on a horse or a bicycle or a motorcycle. And the black saddlebags, they will often fly in tandem, but then when the female oviposits, she'll drop down from the male will hover over her, and she'll drop eggs. You'll see the females tapping, tapping, tapping. And so each time she taps, she's releasing an egg singly from her ovipositor. And there are some species, I don't know for sure about black saddlebags, but there are some species that use that can lay up to 300 eggs in a minute. And so you'll see them tap, tap, tapping. And then on the right is a real interesting saddlebags. This one you'll notice they're kind of reddish brown. And this is a Carolina saddlebags. And Carolina saddlebags are a species that have been moving into Wisconsin, showing up more and more frequently, especially in southern Wisconsin. Historically, they've been primarily a southern US species. And so some of our research, again, collected by citizen scientists, is helping identify what we think are maybe some early signals of responses to climate change. We could have the next slide. Here is, I just got giddy the first time I saw one of these, because I'd seen them in other places, but I hadn't seen them in Wisconsin. This is one of our smaller dragonflies. It's called the dot-tailed whiteface. And so you can see the yellow dot on the near the tip of the abdomen. And then when you look at it head on, this dragonfly has a white face. And they're found throughout Wisconsin, but they're never very abundant. And I think part of that may be a sampling artifact. Because they're small, they tend to perch, they don't fly a lot. We just don't see them as easily. And so I'm really interested to see as we get more people doing more observations, what we find. But this dragonfly is about an inch or less long, whereas the common green darner that you saw is closer to 3 inches. And I want to say that historically, dragonflies are very old as a group of animals. They date back about 300 to 350 million years ago. And at that time, sort of during the Paleozoic, they were about the size of a red-tailed hawk. So, you know, common green darner, imagine a common green darner the size of a red-tailed hawk. That is impressive. So if we could have the next slide. This is another small dragonfly. This is the eastern amberwing. Again, about an inch or less long. And this one, we tend to find pretty widespread. We find it around a lot of ponds. Tends to be a little later in the season. And this one tends to fly in swarms and groups, and it tends to hug the shoreline. And so it's a very interesting, even though it's small, it's very, very territorial aggressive towards other males. And then the next slide. This is one of my favorite dragonflies. This is a Halloween pennant. And I did some research on these on mountaintop lakes in eastern Tennessee, but I was doing research on the naiads. I really didn't know very much about the adults until about 15 years ago when we first started learning adults. And so I was learning as my students were learning. But Halloween pennant is a species that if you look for it out over the water, along the margins of the ponds, you might miss it because it tends to be found in the tall grasses, tall prairie plants. It tends to feed and perch away from the water. And so this is one that is very, very dependent on a vegetated buffer around the edge of ponds. And that's one of the things that we're we're using is we're learning about relationships between characteristics of the pond, how clear they are, the kind of vegetation, and what species they are. And we're using that to inform management decisions and development decisions. So there's a lot of applications. Next slide. And this is I had never seen this dragonfly. And the first time one of the citizen scientist volunteers sent me a photo, because we use photo verification, photo vouchers. I misidentified it. I thought it was something else. And then this volunteer challenged me on the ID, and it just made my day. And I had misidentified it, and they told me why they thought it was a bandwing skimmer. And I looked more closely, and it was a bandwing skimmer. And so this is a relatively new one. There are a lot of red abdomen dragonflies, skimmers, and meadowhawks that they tend to be late season flyers. So the common green darner that you saw earlier is one that shows up even now, and those have tended to migrate from farther south, not necessarily hatched from the ponds yet, but migrate from farther south. And they tend to fly throughout the summer. There are others that they tend to fly around June and July, and then others tend to fly around July, August, and September. We can see them, some species flying up until about the first real hard freeze. The next slide. And this is also a relatively new dragonfly. We added it to our field guide. And if you go to Upper Sugar River Watershed Association's website, you can download the field guide and frequently asked questions and some training materials. We'll be going over those in more depth. Hannah and I are in the process of updating our field guide to include female dragonflies. We focused initially on males because they were more observable, and I thought that was a better place to start. But so many of our monitors were sending me photos of females, and when we debriefed, we decided we would add females to the field guide. But this is a spot-winged glider. And so notice I said spot-winged glider. And then we talked about the common green darner, big feature being the green head and thorax. We talked about the dot-tailed white face. So it has a white face and a dot on its tail. The bandwing, and the black saddlebags, Carolina saddlebags. The common name is often very descriptive of what you see. And so on the hind wings, you can see a couple of spots at the base of the wings. This is another species that we tend to see more frequently away from water. I've seen large swarms of them feeding about the time that corn is tasseling. And so literally just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and another glider species, wandering glider. You may find them, I've seen them in parking lots well away from water. These are called gliders because the glider species that we have, they're able to hold their hind wings. All four wings can move independently, which is remarkable and is informing some design of futuristic flying vehicles. But the gliders are able to use their hind wings to glide. You'll notice they're pretty broad, the hind wings, and this allows species like gliders to migrate over large distances so they can conserve energy while they're flying. There is a species that migrates approximately 11,000 miles. I'll say that again, 11,000 miles. When I read it, I thought it was misinformation and a website. And then I followed up with the actual research report. So there's a species of glider that migrates 11,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. We have species that migrate as far as Texas and Florida. And the next slide. And then I think we'll wrap up. This is from our newsletter. And so you can read the actual article, but I just wanted to show you some of the ways that we can use the data. And so on the left, you can see we had, in 2020, we had 12 different ponds that we monitored. And so the y-axis is number of species observed, so the total number of species observed. And so at Copperleaf Trail Pond, there were 16 species observed at one pond. I find that just remarkable. You can see that the minimum number we had were 4 species, and then a number that are around 6 to 8 species. And so now we can look at what was it about Copperleaf Trail Pond compared to then say Valley View Drive Pond. What are the differences? And we can look at vegetation. Volunteers also measure water clarity with turbidity tubes. We can look at the size of the pond. We can look at the number of storm drains. We can use GIS to look at the percentage of lawn in the watershed of the pond. We know that lawn influences zooplankton, so like copepods and Daphnia water fleas. The higher percentage of lawn in an area, the lower the species number of zooplankton. And we think that dragonflies may be responding to that as well. And then on the right, then we have for each species, and I think we found 32 species this summer. There are about 130 to 150 species of dragonflies in Wisconsin. And so we observed 32 just in our watershed, which I'm guessing that might seem like a higher number of species than, it's higher than I thought it would be. But we found 32 species, and you can see that there are several species that we only observed at one location. And so again, we can go back and look at what was it about that location. And then you'll also notice that I think it was common green darner and 12-spotted skimmer down at the bottom of that figure. They were found at all the ponds. And so there are some species that are only found at certain kinds of ponds. Are there features of those ponds that they have in common? And ultimately, we can start look at, are there some things that the dragonflies are telling us? Like, we're pretty sure vegetated buffers are important. So we can work towards, in the future, having ponds that aren't mowed right to the edge if they're a municipal pond, encouraging homeowners associations and neighborhood associations to allow for vegetated buffers, because they do look kind of weedy, they do look kind of unkempt, but it suggests that they have higher environmental quality. And then I think maybe that's the last slide. Yeah. So that's my quick run through of about what we've learned about dragonflies and our ponds. And I do want to say that we wouldn't be able to say any of this without people like you, the people that support the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association through membership, and also then people that commit their time to helping us collect data. And my approach and my hope has been that these aren't data that just inform and increase scientific knowledge, but rather these are data that homeowners can use, landowners can use, neighborhoods can use, communities can use. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Robert, so much. Yeah. Before we hear from our two monitors that are going to share in monitoring, does anyone have any questions for Robert? You can either say them out loud or type them into the chat.
Yeah, I had one confusion about the relationship to water. Are their eggs actually laid in water? Are they in water part of the time? And why do they have to be near water?
Very good question. Yes, the eggs are almost, one of the things I love about science is it's almost always. So almost always they are laid in water. There are a few species that will lay eggs on vegetation out of water. And then as the eggs hatch, the naiads drop into the water. There is one tropical species that the eggs are laid in bromeliads on trees, and they develop in the water in the bromeliads. The naiads use dissolved oxygen. So the naiads are completely aquatic after they've hatched from the eggs. So they use dissolved oxygen. The adults, they tend to be found more near the water, I think in part because that's where their preferred food sources are typically abundant, because they feed heavily on mosquitoes. They feed heavily on midges or lake flies. They feed heavily on damselflies, another species related to dragonflies. They feed on butterflies and moths. And so they tend to find those in higher abundance around water. But there are a few species, again, that they just tend to do better away from water feeding. So most species are in or around water.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Robert? And we'll have more time at the end. So if you think...
I have a question. Is it true that when the dragonflies collect their prey, like mosquitoes, they will put their 6 legs together to make a basket, and then as they fly, they will gather up these mosquitoes? Is that true?
Yeah, so they tend to catch food while flying, and they catch them with their legs. They form a basket. Some of them will take that to a perch and eat. Others will actually feed on the wing. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because these are remarkable predators. They have a 90 to 95% effectiveness rate of catching prey that they attack. So they don't miss very often. Part of that is they have incredible eyes. I mean, most of the head is eyes, but they're one of the most efficient predators that I know of. I mean, that catch per effort rate is huge. And part of what they do is, remember, they're typically catching things that are also flying. They're tracking, and they're flying to where the prey is going to be. Which again, I'm like, wait, this thing doesn't have a brain. It's got ganglia, it's got groups of neuron. They're just remarkable. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, when I talk to my summer school classes about dragonflies, we call the dragonflies the mosquito patrol. And then I also tell them that the dragonflies actually invented fast food.
Yeah. And the dragonfly, I read somewhere this morning that I think maybe that comes from a folklore story originating out of Romania, and it was a story that the devil turned a horse into a dragon. And so that is the earliest that it showed up in literature. It was probably a mistranslation, as so many things are. But they've also, I grew up calling them snake feeders in Eastern Tennessee. And I think that was because people thought that snakes ate them. That doesn't happen, but it was Tennessee. and I grew up there. And then they've also been called devil's darning needles. And apparently there are just old stories to scare children about them sewing the mouths of children shut, which is, oh, I'm sorry, there's some youth on here. I didn't see you. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you.
I'm scared. I'm so scared.
I have one question, Hannah. Robert, we're going to hear from a couple of our volunteers in a bit here, but I was curious from your perspective, Robert, as a researcher. We have so many of these volunteers going around to different ponds and collecting data, and we've had this for years now, and I know you've had student groups as well. What is your ultimate goal with this data, and why is it so important that we're collecting all this citizen science data on dragonflies?
Yeah, thanks. I think it started out just out of my typical scientific curiosity and interest. And dragonflies have been part of my research program really since I was an undergraduate. And I think that's where it started. I think it's evolved into something much more meaningful for me, is that it's a connection to communities. It's a connection to people. Throughout my career, I've tried to understand relationships among land, water, and people. And I think dragonflies are just a relatively unique organism to do that with, because people see them. There's some connection to them. Most people, when they see a common green darner, are pretty impressed. We find them throughout the area. And because they have an aquatic stage and a terrestrial stage, they're a nice link between ponds and bodies of water and then land. And I think, my two hopes would be that, again, landowners, neighborhoods, communities begin to use some of the data that they've collected to then inform local policy and management decisions, and that it inspires stewardship very broadly. This research is mostly situated in urban stormwater ponds, which, I've got colleagues that it's hard to get them passionate about urban stormwater ponds, yet they're part of. You don't have to go very far from where you live to encounter a stormwater pond. And so they're everywhere on the landscape. They're part of our landscape, and they're part of our ecology. So I think those are my hopes. I think, that the gold standard for me would be when we get an email from some homeowners association or neighborhood or friends group, and they're asking questions that they want to answer using dragonfly data. That would be sort of the ultimate. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. David, it looks like you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
Yes, I came in a little bit late. I don't know if you covered it or not, but did you cover the difference between damselflies and dragonflies? And
I did not. And thank you for asking that. Dragonflies, and if you go to our field guide, and again, you can get that on the website, there's some nice descriptors, but in short, dragonflies will always hold their wings flat along a horizontal plane when they're perched, and damselflies, for the most part, will hold the wings together. They'll fold the wings together over their thorax. Damselflies also tend to have a very thin, almost needle-like abdomen, and dragonflies tend to have a more robust abdomen. There is one species of damselfly that it's in between, where the wings aren't held flat and they're not held vertical, and those are the spread-wing damselflies. There is some interest in developing a damselfly field guide. And because we're a small organization, I sometimes think of us as the little organization that could, and we keep trying. Right now, we're going to focus on adding female dragonflies. And then maybe in 2022, we'll have some resources and we'll try to pilot a damselfly study. But yeah, thanks. Good question.
But what I was more curious about is, are they predaceous like the dragonflies? What do they eat? Damselflies.
Yes, they're voracious predators as well. All the dragonflies and damselflies are in a group called the Odonata, or the toothed ones. And so they are carnivores. They catch and eat other insects. And that's true for the naiads as well, though the naiads in small stages do feed on zooplankton. I think I became an ecologist because I like to watch animals eat other animals. I think that's what motivated me as an elementary school student.
I got one observation about dragonflies. I lived in a house that had a really high deck, and the air current swept between my house and the next one. And the dragonflies used to sit in that air current, just like a trout in water. And every once in a while, they dart out, and they would catch something in midair. It was just like watching a fish.
Yeah. They have, because the four wings can move independently, they're just remarkable hoverers. So they can hover really well. Thank you.
If you have any more questions for Robert, please save them and we can ask more after we hear from our two monitors, or you can type them into the chat and I'll read them afterwards as well.
And I think, Hannah, you can also share my email. And if people have questions, want to follow up afterwards, I'm never unhappy to get a dragonfly question.
And you can always come to our dragonfly training and ask all of your questions there. But we are joined by two of our most committed dragonfly monitors today. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves, share how long they've been monitoring dragonflies in the watershed. And then I didn't prepare you for this question, but if you could share the ponds that you visit most often or your favorite ponds to monitor at. Jesse and Kristen are our two monitors. Thanks for being here. I don't know if, Jesse, do you want to start?
Okay, am I on? Good, okay. I started the middle of last summer, so I haven't been doing this for very long. I started mostly because I saw an ad in the Verona Press looking for volunteers, and I had never been involved in anything like this before. And I'm a bird watcher and a photographer. So I thought it was something else to do while I was out on my hikes, and picked it up and loved it. And I found that I prefer the more challenging sites. Robert had suggested last year that I try Shoveler's Sink. And although it's very challenging kind of physically, there's no trails. It's very up and down. There's a lot of holes. It's not very safe, but there's a huge variety of dragonflies because there's not a lot of people. There's a lot of variety of birds and other kinds of wildlife as well. So I enjoy it there. And of course, the Whalen Pond is amazing. What they've done there is incredible. It's so healthy. There are so many kinds of dragonflies. There are so many frogs and turtles and all sorts of little bugs and all sorts of fun stuff to look at, take pictures of. It's an amazing, healthy little snippet of nature there in the middle of the neighborhood. What else am I supposed to answer? I've forgotten.
That's all for now. And then I'll ask you another question in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep. Kristen. I was going to repeat the question, but go ahead.
Oh, no, you can repeat it again.
If you could share, man, I don't remember what it was.
Oh, yeah, monitoring.
And what ponds? There it is.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Lamers, and I think officially, I have been monitoring for 3 years. I know I got trained, I think, with the first year of training, and then for some reason, I don't know, the summer in between, so the first one and then the next summer, for some reason, I don't know what happened, but I wasn't monitoring. And then last summer, I started back up again, and I absolutely love it. I think I'm trying to figure out how I got involved with the training. I know I had met Robert even before my first training, because we live in neighborhoods that kind of butt up to each other, and he did a very informal training for the kids in the neighborhood, and I remember bringing my son there, and then I think there must have been, I don't know how I heard about it, but anyways, I heard about it and attended the training at the Verona Library. And let's see, well, what I do, because we're a pretty busy family. I've got 2 young kids. I monitor the retention pond in my neighborhood. So that's really nice. It's just right across the street. And I have envisions of getting the neighborhood kids involved. I haven't so much yet. I try to get my kids, but because it's mom's thing, they don't like to get involved. But I've gotten my husband involved a little bit. He has a very nice camera, and so I bring him along to help take pictures of things so I can identify things better. So I do that pond, and then they just put a new retention pond in down the road, and so I started that pond last summer, and looking at the differences between a more established pond and then the new pond. And now I have found another pond while driving around that's actually over closer by Epic, and I don't know if anybody is doing that one. It's a pretty small little thing, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to start monitoring that one too.
Thanks, Kristen. As the Jessica and Kristen are talking, if you have questions for them, please feel free to raise your hand, speak up, or put them into the chat. So my next question is, why is monitoring meaningful to you?
Me?
Jessica, feel free.
Start
Go
over.
ahead.
Okay. It's meaningful to me because I've always had an interest in all things natural, all sorts of plants, all sorts of creatures. And I think really what monitoring does is it gets me really in touch with nature and being outside, and it's made me a great observer. Birds can be pretty small, but dragonflies are really small. So you're watching all the time for the smallest motion, the smallest noise, and it really gets you in touch with what's going on around you. It changes the way you see the whole world, I think. It's improved my vision. I see things a lot differently. I see things a lot more quickly than I used to. And I think it really changes your connection with the whole world. So. More? Is that it? Is good?
You did. That is good for now. Thanks,
Okay.
Jessie.
Yeah.
Kristen, why is monitoring meaningful to you?
Well, gosh, let's see. I really enjoy it because it's helping me learn more about a portion of the natural world that I did not focus on while I was in college. I got a zoology degree, but I never took any entomology classes, and so I'm increasing my own knowledge. I think dragonflies are fabulous creatures, and so being able to monitor them is really exciting. Finding new species is super exciting, and I also like being able to contribute to the general understanding and information about dragonflies. It seems like there's not as much information out there on dragonflies as there are on other critters, and I think it's important for people to learn about dragonflies too. And people like dragonflies. They're kind of a special species, and when you talk to people about dragonflies, you know, people get excited. So that's why I like doing it.
And we have a good question in the chat on what info do Dragonfly monitors collect? Do one of you want to take that? Or I can pull up that info as well.
I can take that. So what I do at my pond, I do the, oh gosh, now my mind just went blank. I look at the water clarity with my tube, and that's really exciting because you kind of, you know, you walk over to the pond and you have all this equipment and people kind of look at you like, ooh, she's kind of a professional over there. So I look at water quality or clarity. I do the 10-minute, you do the 10-minute watching for different dragonfly species. I record the temperature and the cloud cover, wind direction. Did I say temperature? Yeah, temperature. And because I go to the same pond a lot, I don't, you know, I mean, I pay attention to the vegetative cover, but it doesn't usually change. So, but, you know, I definitely will, with my new ponds, will pay attention to, you know, the amount of cover versus non-cover.
And as Kristen mentioned, she measures water clarity with a turbidity tube. And one thing that I learned that I think is super interesting is I would have assumed that the ponds that have more nutrients and plant life and animal life would be where you would find more dragonflies because there's just more there. But what we actually find is that the ponds that have much less of that is where you find more dragonflies. So it's very interesting. They're unique creatures.
One of the things that was alluded to is that we have some ponds that are relatively newly created. So these are all the ponds that we've looked at thus far engineered. We're hoping to get some naturally occurring prairie ponds and some farm ponds so we can get a broader understanding. But one of the things that I've been interested in as development happens, then identifying ponds that are brand new, and so that we can get baseline data. And so one of the first ponds that I looked at that was brand new a couple of years ago blew my initial model out of the water. I thought that we would see a gradual increase with age of the pond to then a peak and then a decline. And we have some ponds like Silent Street Pond that, you know, are more than 30 years old. And we have a few that are, you know, about 5 years old. I didn't have any yet that were 0 years old. Well, this brand new pond I looked at a couple of years ago had the highest number of species that I've ever seen at a stormwater pond. And I think what was going on is it's just a brand new habitat. Things haven't carved up niches. They're not partitioning space. They're not doing those things that happen with time. And so it looks more like a brand new pond, might have really high numbers of species, then come down as other things colonize it, like amphibians, and then begin to go back up. But we're real interested in finding some relatively young ponds to see what we can learn on that end of it.
I have a question based on what you just said, Robert. When new ponds go in, retention ponds go in, is there a stocking of any sort of amphibian or something into it, or is it just allowed to naturally occur? And also on the subject of man-made ponds, is Shoveler Sink a man-made pond?
So Shoveler Sink, and I was just there today because I love the spring migration of waterfowl. And so just for your information, it's not about dragonflies, but if you're into birds, and I know Jesse is, there were a lot of blue-winged teals, and I saw a greater yellow legs that was doing its alarm call Just freaked me out at first until I found it. But Shoveler's Sink was scraped. So it's a long, rather large sink. It's very shallow, and it's designed for waterfowl production. So it too was man-made. I think it's low enough that it has been a naturally occurring sink, but it's definitely been engineered. I'm not aware of any ponds, stormwater ponds, that have been sort of inoculated, if you will, with amphibians. There have been some where I know that they've done prairie plantings, which I think is wonderful. You know, the more that could be encouraged, the better. One of the interesting things I've noticed is over time, I've got about 70 ponds that I've looked at for various things throughout Dane County. And all of these started out as fishless. Now, more than half of them have fish. And a lot of the fish are bait fish that get dumped. And I've seen some pretty honking big goldfish that freak me out when I catch them in a net, because I'm not expecting a big goldfish in a pond. So I'm not aware of them being stocked with any animal species. Occasionally plant species, but yeah, I think it's just a new niche space that opens up, and things begin to find it.
Great, thank you very much.
Good questions. We have a couple more in the chat. One is, how do you identify dragonflies? Jesse, Kristen, do you want to take that?
How? I really physically how, or comparing it to a guide, or what are we after?
That's a good question. What is your personal method? So what do you do when you visit a pond?
When I visit, I'm a photographer. So what I do is I don't try to identify while I'm there. So I take pictures of everything. And when I find a dragonfly, I try to take a picture from the top, the side. I try to get underneath. I try to get face on if they'll cooperate, because a lot of them are very similar. And so you need all the specific views. Some you can't identify the damselflies unless you can handle them and tip them upside down and check them out. So I try to get as many identifying features as I can, and then I bring all my pictures home and then see what I've got, you know. And sometimes I post to Wisconsin Dragonfly Society on Facebook. I post to our monitor page on Facebook. One of my good friends I often send pictures to. I had mentioned to you, I recently joined the board of the Wisconsin Dragonfly Society, and they are incredibly knowledgeable. So those guys can almost always tell you what you've got. They're very helpful. I do some of the guide comparison. I have all the books and the guides and such. But if it's not super obvious, a lot of times you just need help, and go to Facebook or somebody more knowledgeable and ask for a little help. So that's what I do.
The point about photography is really good. I know quite a few of our other volunteer monitors do that same technique. They will be taking photos, and what they first identified when in person, if they'll go look at a photo later, they'll be like, oh, that might not have been, that's not actually what it is. And we do have a guidebook that Robert has put together, and you can find that on our website, but I think Wade has also put it in the chat. And if you open that, you can see a wide array of the different dragonflies that we have people monitoring for, and the photos. And that is really one of the easiest, if not the only way to identify dragonflies, is by how they look and by the colors on their bodies and their wings. Kristen.
Dragonflies aren't too bad, but the damselflies can be tough if you're into that, which I am. So
for me, I don't always have a camera available. And so what I have learned to do is identify the main characteristics of the more common dragonflies. And I spend a lot of time looking at, I just use the guide that the Watershed Association has put out. And a lot of times I will email Robert, and either with a description or if I do get a picture, and he really has helped me out a lot. And after a while, you do tend to get an idea of what you're looking at. And, you know, a lot of it is, you can just write down on your sheet. If you don't know what it is, you can just say, I think it's a possible. You know, it's not like taking a test or anything. You know, we're all around to help each other. And one thing that I participated in last summer that was awesome were the Dragonfly meetup, where a lot of the volunteers would meet socially distanced, of course, with our masks at different areas. And we kind of did some observing together, and that really helped. It was fun. Gave me something to do in the summer, and also helped me learn some new species.
Yeah, and that's, I really appreciate hearing sort of the two approaches from Jesse and Kristen, and you know that one of the things about the field guide compared to books that you might purchase is it is confined to things that we expect to find in this area. And so, you know, again, I mentioned there are about 130 to 150 species throughout Wisconsin. We've got a field guide that has closer to 50 species that we might expect to find around here. And so, you know, that makes identification a little easier. Also, the field guide has the flight season. So one of the things that I know is I'm going to tend to find meadowhawks later in the summer and early fall. And then we also have descriptions of behavior. There are some flight patterns that you can start to pick up, and where they forage, whether they perch frequently. There are a couple of species that tend to fly right around sunset. You know, I looked for years for a smoky shadow dragon, probably one of the coolest names of a dragonfly. Well, maybe a bog haunter is another really cool name, but smoky shadow dragon. And they tend to fly around dusk. And turns out the two ponds in my neighborhood, we have smoky shadow dragon. But I had never gone there looking for dragonflies about dusk. So one of the things we encourage is for monitors that have some flexibility in their schedule is to vary the time of day that they go out. I want to say the other thing is 10 years ago when we were developing this, most of my colleagues were skeptical. They were like, you know, it was almost like a patronizing pat on the head. Well, good for you, Robert. That's good. But we won't be able to use the data. And what we have found with the photo verification, I have high degree of confidence in the IDs. And so we're collecting data that are scientifically useful. You know, that I think it's just been remarkable what the volunteers have done. You know, Wade asked, you know, one of my long-term hopes, and one of the things that I hope is that in the future, somebody like Kristen is doing this talk and doing this training. Somebody like Jesse is doing this talk and doing this training. You know, that's my hope. My hope is that we're actually growing and supporting a next generation of citizen scientists that aren't just assisting scientists, but are doing the research and guiding the research and leading the research. And I think that's completely within our reach. We've included it in our strategic plan as something we hope to happen in the next 5 years. And I think it's entirely possible.
Well, I have one more question for Jesse and Kristen. So if you all are thinking of your own questions, feel free to again raise your hand or type them into the chat. But my last question is, what would you tell someone who is interested in becoming a Dragonfly monitor, but unsure if they are the right fit?
Me first, again. I would say if it's something that interests you, you're the right fit. All you have to do is enjoy it. You don't even have to be necessarily scientifically successful. You can go out, you can enjoy being outside in the fresh air, go for a little hike, enjoy some of the ponds and the natural areas. And if you are able to identify some of the dragonflies, wonderful. And you learn as you go, you know, don't be intimidated. The first day you might see one that you're able to identify, like the common green darners are obviously very easy to identify. They're out right now. It's an early one. It's the only thing you're going to see. You know what it is. Well, there you go. You've started already. You're a monitor. And, you know, as you go, you learn more and more. So take it on, learn a little bit at a time, ask questions. Dragonfly people are amazingly kind and amazingly knowledgeable, and everybody will help you. So that's it.
Thanks, Jesse. Kristen.
Well, I have to say I agree with everything that Jesse said. I would say if you have even just a little bit of interest, try it, check it out. It's really fun. It's not threatening at all. You know, we all have to start at ground zero, and I didn't know how to identify dragonflies at all when I started. And you know, the guide is so nice that it has only a smaller chunk of species, and you know, like I was saying before, you can always just put down what you think it is on your form, and you know, that's okay. We're all here to learn together, and everybody I've met has been so nice, and Robert is so knowledgeable and so helpful, and it's just a really good group of people, and it just, you feel good about yourself when you're doing it, because you're increasing your own knowledge, but you're also helping out the planet. You know, who knows where this data and information may end up someday. You know, I mean, it could be really, really helpful for the world.
Thanks, you two. This is really great. So looks like we have another question in the chat. So for those of you interested in becoming a citizen, a Dragonfly monitor with our citizen science programs, you just need to join one of our trainings. And we have an upcoming virtual training that will cover the scientific methods of training and the scientific backgrounds of dragonflies a little bit more in depth than you learned today. And that is on May 13th. And you can RSVP on our website. But then we do have an upcoming in-person Dragonfly Monitors training on May 22nd. So, and that will be a more hands-on or binoculars on type of training where you can see, and Robert will help you identify the different dragonflies as you see them. And then we do have locations. One of the questions was, do we have do we have a map of the ponds that are already being monitored? That will be up on our website, hopefully soon. Okay.
And Hannah, I would add, you know, the sites that, you know, our hope is that we will return to sites that we've monitored, because, you know, the kind of data that we need to say things about climate change and about effects of different management practices, that tends to happen more on the decade scale. And so it's important that we return year after year to sites, but it's also, you know, our hope is that if you've got a pond near you that you want to take a look at, that becomes one of our new ponds. And so we're always interested in expanding. Someone asked a question about the Sugar River itself. Yes, we would love to have streams and rivers in the watershed for people to have monitoring sites, because that tends to be where we would find a group called the clubtails They tend to be more riverine. I know when we start to add riverine sites, we're going to increase the number of species that we found. We've added a few county records. Someone also asked about the Wisconsin Odonata survey. Bob Dubois, who was with Wisconsin DNR and recently retired, he provided so many materials for us and was just really, really helpful in sharing materials and sharing information. And he has been my go-to. So when I get a photo and it's like, I don't know what this is, Bob has been the person that I've sent things to.
Are there any other questions, either for our monitors or for Robert? Well, it was really, really great to see you all. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I do hope to see some of you, if not all of you, at one of our upcoming Dragonfly monitoring trainings. As was already said, it really is a simple onboarding process and anybody can become a Dragonfly monitor. So we do recommend it. And even if you don't live in the Watershed or in Madison or in the area, you can still monitor Dragonflies and we will collect your data too.
I have something to add quick if anybody's interested. Through the Wisconsin Dragonfly Society, if people follow them on Facebook or on the website, because of the pandemic, we're going to do at least 3 bio blitzes again this year, where they do set amounts of time where people all over the state do monitoring. So if people are interested, either follow them on Facebook or go to the website and look for more information on that. There should be one each in June, July, and August. So maybe more.
And I think also I want to put in a plug. If the stars align, if COVID things align, if schedules align, Jesse may also do a photography workshop for people hands-on, sort of in the field and drawing on her experience and expertise. And so, you know, look for that both on the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association's web pages and Facebook. And so we really appreciate that, Jesse. Your photos are just remarkable.
Thank you. I love doing it.
Jesse, would you speak to that BioBlitz once more? There's a question about more information on that.
Sure. It's similar to what the Watershed is doing here with the Dragonfly monitoring, except it's statewide. It's sponsored by the Wisconsin Dragonfly Society, and it is just going out and monitoring by yourself. They're going to provide some materials with what to expect to see in different areas of the state during those particular dates. It's usually a 2-day period over a weekend that people would go out and just look in your own area and see what you see and then report back. And they're going to have also, where we have volunteers, some group monitoring available. If people are interested in leading groups and meeting up to do, obviously distanced and whatever's appropriate at the time, monitoring. They're being very careful about that, but there will be some help also available in some areas. And then all of the information will get entered on the YATRI website. And it gives them, so many people do it during the BioBlitz that it gives them so much more information, because people don't tend to enter their information very often, or like me, wait till the end of the year and enter it all. That's what I did. So the BioBlitzes give them a little information every month. So I don't know if that answers the question, but if you want more information, feel free to contact me directly or to check out the Wisconsin Dragonfly Society, either on the website or the Facebook page. We'll be posting.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we will hang around
Great.
for any questions or any last things people would like to share. But again, thank you for joining. It was really good to see all of you. And if you want more information, please visit our website at the link in the chat.
Thanks, everybody. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse and Kristen. It was really great to have you both.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you. I'm excited for summer to come.
Me too.
Us too. And thank you, Robert, of course.
Yep, as always. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for being here.